Good day, mates. My name is Mordecai, and welcome back to the show, where an aspiring roleplayer narrates various RPG-related stories as a learning tool. I am speaking through my familiar Aquata for this narration. In a wide variety of role-playing games, regardless of whether or not they are tabletop role-playing games such as Dungeons & Dragons, or video games such as Jeff Light's Powder, you have access to a character sheet. This useful sheet contains all of the information that is important to the character, such as their inventory, maximum hit points, what spells they know, and what skills they are capable of using, to name a few items. What this does is make the character sheet one of the most important tools in the arsenal of both players and dungeon masters. And one of the neatest applications of the character sheet is being able to see how the character has changed over the course of the campaign. Compare a brand new character in Powder to a late game character that has conquered the final boss. Sure, the late game character looks more impressive, up until you realise that the high level character was once running around on a maximum hit point limit of merely 15. Now, let's do a little thought experiment. What would happen if the character sheet was completely blank? Let's embark on another delve to find out what happened to one group in which a player had a blank character sheet. Before we begin with today's story, if you like my content and want to see more, feel free to subscribe and like the video. It's free to do, and every bit of support is highly appreciated. Plus, you can always change your mind at a later date. Let's delve into the often terrifying world of r/RPGHorrorStories. Today's narrative is titled The Tale of the Blank Character Sheet, and is written by user Peach Cobblers. Hi everyone, let me tell you a tale. The tale of the blank character sheet. This happened a few years ago, and I don't think anyone involved was really all that terrible, but it is a funny story, and I think you all might enjoy it. This campaign covered a pre-written module, although which one is not particularly important, since the only real character of note to the story is the Warlock. The Warlock in this campaign always seemed pretty passive to me, in that for the entirety of the campaign, they never used a single spell, subclass ability, pact boon, or Eldritch Invocation, aside from Agonizing Blast. In combat, they only ever used Eldritch Blast. But at the time, I figured that they just wanted to play their Warlock in that way, and that I shouldn't try to play their character for them. We were almost done with the campaign at a certain point, after a few months, at level 7 out of the projected 8 for the end of the campaign, and we were in a very difficult combat encounter. The Warlock said something along the lines of, "Well, I can't do anything else, I'll do Eldritch Blast," on their turn. This is where the Warlock started to fall apart a bit. In passing, I said, "You could cast a spell if you didn't want to use Eldritch Blast." There was some mumbling from the Warlock, and after a long pause, they tried to cast Wall of Fire in a way that would involve friendly fire on our party. After the DM explained that, the Warlock changed the placement of the Wall of Fire to avoid hurting our allies. Later in the encounter, people were making death saving throws, and the Warlock said on their turn something along the lines of, "I wish I could help, but all I really have is Eldritch Blast." They were playing a Celestial Warlock, and having played one before, I mentioned that they could use their first level ability to heal some of the characters that were down if they wanted to, as a bonus action. Cue some more mumbling, and then a single roll of a single d6, which was not necessarily how the ability worked, and the Warlock said, "Okay, player X, you get 4 hit points, and I just used my second spell slot, so I can't use that again." It is worth mentioning that the first level Celestial Warlock ability does not require the use of a spell slot. It has its own resource, and at level 7, the Warlock could have used it 7 more times. I tried to explain, without trying to be a rules lawyer, that wasn't how the ability worked. but I stopped after the Warlock started ranting about how complicated keeping track of all the spells and abilities were. One of the other players tried to suggest looking at their character sheet on Roll20, where the spells were listed and that the character mancer can build it for them, and the Warlock got even more heated about it. The other player backed off and said, Okay, that's fine, I was just suggesting it." At this point, the DM speaks up and says that they just took a look at the Warlock's character sheet on Roll20, and that it was completely blank. The only thing on there was the health points and the Eldritch Blast cantrip. We were all stunned into silence for a bit, and the DM had to step away for a break, clearly being exasperated. The rest of the session went by a bit awkwardly, and we really only had 1 or 2 sessions left in the campaign, so this was quickly swept under the rug for the rest of the campaign until it was all over. The Warlock was not a new player and had actually played D&D before. This was also not their first campaign on Roll20. I still don't really know why they didn't try to use Roll20, or ask for help with it, use D&D Beyond, some other online character sheet creator, or even a physical character sheet, but I still remember how dispirited the DM sounded when they said to the group that the Warlock's character sheet was blank. After that campaign was over, the DM did not invite the Warlock back to the next campaign. As a DM, I understood the feelings that our DM had. I just felt so bad for our Dungeon Master to put the effort into running the campaign and the prep and the story for one of the players to have a completely blank character sheet and not make any real attempt to learn how their class works. I don't entirely have the Warlock's side of the story, but it just felt disrespectful. Anyway, it's not as bad as some of the other stories on the subreddit here, and I hope that the Warlock is having fun playing D&D, or in general is doing well. They weren't a bad person at all. I did like them as a person, and I actually enjoyed playing with them most of the time, but I think at the bare minimum, you need to fill out a character sheet if you want to play Dungeons & Dragons. In summary, after several months in a campaign, a player has a completely blank character sheet, much to our Dungeon Master's dismay. And that's where the story ends. In all honesty, I genuinely have no idea how the Warlock was expecting to be able to play his character without a proper character sheet. I get the distinct impression that the problem player may have been trying to keep his entire character sheet in his head. There are of course several problems with this, such as the confusion over how a Celestial Warlock's Healing Light subclass feature actually worked, without spell slots. But for me, the biggest problem has to be that no one else could see what the character sheet was. What if the player had to take the next session off? Or what about saving throws, or needing to roll for a skill check? A character sheet isn't just a stat block for referencing what a character is capable of doing, what spells they have prepared, or even what items they have on hand. A character sheet can provide you with how the character sees their day-to-day life. It provides a tangible connection between you and the character you are playing. Not to mention that it can also allow for the character to be more than just a cardboard cutout of a one-trick pony. And whilst there's nothing inherently wrong with merely wanting to be the dude who just Eldritch blasts things with a cantrip, having a blank character sheet would contribute to that mentality. For the prospective player, having a filled out character sheet is also a great way to note down everything the character is capable of doing at face value. Since it is relevant to the discussion on how important a character sheet is, we're going to go into a bit of overtime. From a player that had no character sheet, to a player who wants to be creative with the class features as presented on their character sheet. The second narrative for today, from the often terrifying world of r/RPGHorrorStories, is titled GM Kicks Player Out for Being Creative Because It's Not a Class Feature, and is written by Lore Chaser 1. Not exactly horrific with gaslighting or psychopaths, but pretty comedic the extent a board gamer will try to conform to playing tabletop RPGs as well, a board game. The group was playing what was essentially a cyberpunk hack for 5th edition. I know, 5th edition can't be everything, whatever, let's move on. The player creates a gun nut ranger character, with proficiency in pretty much every tool you would associate with making weapons of destruction, and insists on going to hardware stores in character. I'm sure you know where this is going. Long story short, the player wanted to use their character's features, and some of their meta-knowledge on the topic, to create makeshift traps, weapons, etc. to be a kinda scrappy guerrilla, which the GM immediately shut down, saying no other class has a feature that lets them craft infinite items that don't cool down, citing the Force Cleric, Artificer, Creation Bard, you know, the lot. The player explains that this is stuff a real person could actually do given the materials, and with their character's skills, it would make sense, which was also shut down by saying it doesn't fit 5th edition. We get into an elaborate justification that pushing items onto people would still do damage even if there is no rules for it because gravity exists. Which was followed by the GM arguing that no, because that would mean enemies would do it, and if they did, that would mean magic items are common. What do they mean by common magic items? The DM tried to make the argument that making anything was magic item crafting, like the downtime rules from base 5th edition, and that they didn't have a class feature that let them do that, so it was impossible. Some of the other players, bless their heart, just said the GM say is final, though some of them seemed fine with this, and even considered their own possibilities of exploring that type of gameplay. You could argue that the player wanted to somehow break the game, but honestly, there's better ways to go about that. It was probably more of a flex. Ultimately, they never got to play that character, and they got booted from the Discord even though this was a pre-game discussion. At least I know this wasn't necessarily a good fit. So, anarchists, what class are you that lets you do what you do? Is gravity a class feature? And that's where the second story ends. I am of the impression that the DM for this second story did not want to consider allowing characters to come up with innovative solutions from common items found in everyday life, which I consider to be really unfortunate, as I love the Macgyver series. The original series with Richard Dean Anderson, not the recent reboot that lasted 2 seasons, I think. Part of what made Richard Dean Anderson's Macgyver so compelling was the tendency to come up with clever solutions for a problem situation using what was on hand and a bit of scientific knowledge. In the episode Flame's End, in the midway point of the first season, he repurposes a revolver as a wrench to avert a nuclear disaster by releasing a significant amount of water pressure. I also find it a bit strange that one of the highlights of 5th edition's design is its inherent flexibility and capacity to adapt for new situations. But the DM insists that a character crafting improvised traps such as snares doesn't fit 5th edition. Because I can honestly see the DM saying no to the use of ball bearings as a terrain hazard by players in a combat scenario, and ball bearings are an item in 5th edition. I will say that the Macgyver player was a bad fit for how the DM wanted to run his seemingly restrictive to the rules game. For the prospective roleplayers out there, if you do want to play a character that takes some inspiration from the original Macgyver series, make sure you clear it with your DM before the game starts. It's better to get kicked out of a server than to be strung along with repeated no's over the course of a long campaign. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed my content and would like to see more, feel free to subscribe and give the video a like. It's free to do, and every bit of support is highly appreciated. Plus, you can always change your mind at a later date. Thank you again for watching, and I shall see you all next time.